Today is June 4, 2026. Exactly 35 days ago, Washington's flagship bill to regulate AI companion chatbots cleared its committee, and since then, we have heard nothing. On April 30th, Senator Josh Hawley and Senator Richard Blumenthal moved the GUARD Act out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was a unanimous 22-0 bipartisan vote to mandate strict age verification and block minors from accessing AI chatbots. But that momentum stopped at the committee doors. The bill is now frozen on the calendar because it is missing two critical pieces: a cost estimate from the Congressional Budget Office and a named funding source to pay for its own enforcement regime. This flowchart outlines the mechanism trapping the bill, known as Section 423 of the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. If a bill imposes a private sector mandate exceeding roughly $218 million a year, it must include a CBO cost estimate or a funding source. The GUARD Act has neither. Because it crosses that threshold empty-handed, a single senator can halt the legislation. Waiving that objection takes 60 votes. A unanimous committee vote carries no weight once a fiscal cost is attached. The bill's survival now depends on the mechanical math of the CBO score and the funding gap left in its own text. Even without the CBO delay, the Senate remains divided on the core theory of the legislation. In a completely different hearing room, the Senate Commerce Committee is advancing a parallel track. Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Brian Schatz introduced the Chatbot Act in late April. This bill relies on a parental duty framework, mandating family accounts where parents grant consent and hold the controls to monitor their child's digital conversations. Across the Capitol in the House of Representatives, the approach fractures again. Representative Brett Guthrie steered the KIDS Act through the Energy and Commerce Committee, clearing it by a 28-24 margin. The House bill requires providers to disclose to minors that they are talking to an AI, surface crisis hotline information when a user mentions self-harm, and enforce a break prompt every 3 hours. It routes enforcement through the Federal Trade Commission and includes language designed to preempt state laws. Washington is currently pursuing competing legal theories, platform duty versus parental duty, that are on a collision course before either reaches the president's desk. But federal legislation is only one way to regulate technology. While Congress debates theories, the administrative state is writing the rules. Federal agencies do not need a CDO score or a roll call vote to alter the market. Following a series of meetings by the Digital Health Advisory Committee, FDA Commissioner Martin Makary has signaled a shift toward a risk-based framework for AI, with a heavy emphasis on post-market monitoring. The FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health is constructing 9 separate guidance documents. For developers building mental health AI tools, the requirements are hardening around strict clinical evidence submissions, data provenance, and mandatory physician oversight. This administrative lane operates outside the congressional gridlock. These rules take effect the moment the FDA publishes the guidance, forcing companies to adjust their compliance pipelines by the next quarter. Underneath the federal stalemate, individual states already acted. By March 2026, California, Washington, and Oregon Governor Tina Kotek had all signed active companion chatbot legislation into law. These laws codify active intervention duties. In California, Oregon, and Washington, the system must detect expressions of suicidal ideation, interrupt the conversation, and execute a hard handoff to crisis resources, like the 988 Lifeline. And since 2021, a nonprofit organization has been operating a federally relevant AI simulator in crisis environments. The Trevor Project uses AI as a primary component of its counselor training pipeline. This architecture map illustrates the counselor-in-the-loop model. The AI never speaks to a vulnerable child. Instead, the model role-plays as an anxious teen, functioning exclusively as a training tool for the human counselor. The machine trains the human in private, ensuring that when a young person dials 988, they connect with a real person on the other end of the line. These state mandates and nonprofit architectures prove the crisis safety net is already being implemented, while Washington argues over the blueprints. We are looking at a disparate regulatory architecture: federal gridlock in one committee, competing bills in another, aggressive FDA guidance, and enacted state laws. Yet the national conversation remains anchored to the GUARD Act, which sits at number 406 on the Senate calendar, waiting for the machinery to turn. Today is day 35. The Congressional Budget Office window opens next week. When that financial score arrives without a funding source, it hands any senator the procedural trigger to block the legislation. Lawmakers are watching a procedural clock to decide if an AI can talk to children. But through new state statutes and federal agency guidance, the regulatory architecture is already being built without them.